Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Brittany Adeline King, and I'm the curatorial assistant here at White Columns. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's reading and book launch for Clonal Hum by Omar Berrada on the occasion of the exhibition Obultra 3 by Matthew Schrader. White Columns is pleased to present this book launch as an event in terms of that exhibition. So for this reading, Omar Berrada will be joined by our fellow poets Christian Campbell, Saretta Morgan, and the edition Obultra 3, which is a portfolio of recent work by Matthew Schrader, accompanied by a chapbook, Clonal Hum by Omar Berrada, was curated and published by Aaron Gemmel and is assigned a number edition of 100. Obultra 3 includes 2 objects based on standard English units of measure and 7 photographs of Atlantis altissima, commonly known as the tree of heaven. Imported as a decorative plant, it is now considered an invasive species. Schrader's work is a synthesis of dual meanings of naturalization, how displaced species proliferate in the new environments, and the technical and ideological process of rendering social structures invisible. Clonal Hum is a poem sequence written in conversation with that portfolio. Editions of Obultra 3 and copies of Clonal Hum are available at White Columns for purchase, and they are also available at obultra.com. The exhibition will be on view from March 23rd through May 15th, 2021. And if you're unable to make it to the gallery to see a show in person, images are available at whitecolumns.org. Again, a special thank you to Omar for working with us, and thank you to Matthew for presenting his exhibition at White Columns. And another thank you, of course, to Christian and Saretta for joining us tonight. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Omar. And again, thank you guys for being here, and to our viewers, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Brittany, and good evening, everyone. I have a piece of paper to read from, and I don't know how to deal with it now with the Zoom and the screen. Good evening, everyone. I cannot see you, but I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude to you all for being here, and by giving thanks to the people who were instrumental in making this little book, and today's launch happen. So thank you to White Columns, and in particular, Brittany Adeline King and Erin Somerville for your care in organizing and hosting this event. Thanks to Matthew Schrader for his invitation to collaborate and for introducing me to the Ailanthus altissima tree, which is the protagonist of the book. Thanks to Aaron Gemmel for designing and publishing Clonal Hum with his editions Michel Obultra. And thanks to my co-readers. When Matthew suggested the idea of a launch event in relation to his show, I immediately wrote to Cecilia Vicuña, Saretta Morgan, and Christian Campbell. And I am enormously grateful to them for accepting the invitation. They are poets and artists whose work speaks to me at a deep level and teaches me new things every time I engage with it. For example, from Cecilia, I learned that life is reciprocity and that language is migrant. From Saretta, I learned that every moment has an after image and a landscape is never empty. From Christian, I learned that I don't have time to miss a beat and all angels have afros. In bringing us together, I had in mind a constellation of thoughts and emotions around questions of language, of land, of migration, around the challenge and the art of living with the elements and of forging a path where no path is given. I decided not to change the intro I just read, even though we heard from Cecilia Vicuña this afternoon that she would probably not be able to join us. She had to fly to Chile for a family emergency. But she is with us in spirit, and we will be thinking about her throughout the reading. I will start with a reading of Clonal Hum, after which Saretta, then Christian will read, and then we will have a conversation. As I said, this book has a protagonist who is a tree, the Ailanthus altissima, and I will share my screen. I hope you can see it. This is the tree, or a tree, one of the trees, and this tree has been given many names and nicknames over the years. A tree of heaven, varnish tree, Chinese sumac, stinking sumac, ghetto palm, and more. It was brought from China to Europe and to North America in the mid 18th century for all sorts of reasons, for shade, for silk, for ornamentation, for insect management. But in recent, not so recent, in almost the last century, it started being considered an invasive species. So in composing these poems, I was thinking about the life, researching the life and the history of this tree, and also the notion of invasiveness and its uses in relation to the present moment. The image that you see on screen is by Matthew Schrader and is in the show at White Columns currently. And the cover of the book, the image on the cover, is also by Matthew. And I will be showing the pages of the book as I read them. A-I-L-A-N that I please and not the pulsing varnish. That the mulberry riches, I am the tree I was. No bombyx, please, and I will not shade the tall tree shuddering and pulsing somewhere far, varnish the lacquer after me. All that silk in the mulberry, a prophecy of riches, a botanical mistake. I am not the tree. I was. No bombyx, please meet, large and worthless cycles. I will not save the morass, the shade, the shape, the tall tree, the gods shuddering and pulsing. Wind I came, somewhere far, is my name, the varnish, the lacquer, Lanto a now after me. All that silk we sewed in the mulberry madness, a prophecy of riches at centuries' end, a botanical mistake of no return. I am not the tree you thought I was. My worm is no bombyx. Please meet Samia Cynthia, large and sloppy and sturdy and worthless. Does it disrupt cycles? I will not save you from the morass. I am the shade and the shape of your discontent, the tall tree of the gods, shuddering and pulsing in scarce wind. I came from somewhere far. Morris is not my name. Forget the varnish, forget the lacquer. Ailanto, Ailanto, now repeat after me. It was a tree for the modern industry, a plant for impoverished soils, pinnate leaves and foul air. It was a tree perfect for us. It would simply make do, grow along a track, hug factory walls, inhale concrete dust, mercury fumes of endless drought, a green veil for your misery, a fresh bout of stinky spring. Does it stimulate fire? You must study the seeds, the apparent randomness of roadsides. Yes, they call it altissima. No, It is not that tall, but man, does it grow up fast. This is a story of mistranslation. If ornament is crime, define invasive. These thresholds of alienness, a subtlety of paper inside the wood, tools of the trade, analog photos of the backlit tree, no use for flash, the night holds information enough in Xerox distortions. The seedlings grew beautifully under different names, the ability to succor, the joy of a black bird blinking, the seasonal stink of a single sumac. Does it clog waterworks? I will grow out of cement if I have to. I am the recurrent image of your future. I am a model of compromised immunity. High is the cost. I rest my case on a bed of thorns. 1784, a leafy name for the slave quarters, an early president, a founding father, a genius of architecture, a concealer of abjection, a Monticello madness. Behind Mulberry Rose, the cabins lie. 1784, a certain Hamilton procured the trees. The same Hamilton shipped ailanthus seeds to this shore. They are sturdy, having crossed Siberia, a Jesuit mission with consequence. Does it destroy forests? 1784, seeds sailing on a ship. 1784, Jefferson's land ordinance is passed, its fifth clause denied. Slavery will expand westward, and so will the tree. The plant is possibly poisonous, a floral bouquet with an aftertaste of cats. Not bushy, not weedy either. Gather a handful of fresh root for the mentally dissociated. A yellow dye is obtained from the leaves, viscid smears upon the sidewalk, toxic effects and rocky outcrops, clonal growth amid older wood. Does it destroy grazing land? Cows will not eat grass near young ailanthus shoots. A tree tracks the eastern light, follows a train of thought, reaps the morning, too tender for Dakota. A sudden wind, a heavy storm, the tree has toppled. Lushly in the tenements we stretch, no insect will come near. Forget the linden, forget the chestnut. Those were the days before window screens. Inside melted into outside, and together they make a kind of dialect to revive, to conserve, to control, to exterminate. Even tapeworms keep a distance from the tree stump. Does it eliminate species? No fir, no spruce, degentrify this place. Let the ghetto palms spread across the land. Do you belong here? Homo sapiens was the most dangerous species of all. Gardeners who fell the tree may suffer rashes. They chopped it down, but it wouldn't die. The weedy wooden pioneer hitchhiking on the stocky backs of animals. These tracks bear witness. No man ever plants the same tree twice. To inhabit, to evolve, to thrive, to disperse. Nowhere is isolated. Nowhere is stable. Suspected invasions made me Chinese again. The treacherous heart of indehiscent seeds, the appetizing scares of today. Does it decimate crops? The last trumpet-shaped bloom has fallen. Mind the spongy pit. My presence is a symptom. The change is yours. I am only here to return the gaze. The baby and the tree together are the song. star-like stigma of sexual difference, a space of filth and dearth, the fear of fecundity, sterile stamens entice all insects. This tree is a concept of time. It lives and breathes, has sharp corners. We shall never stop planting. This tree is a concept of race. The fair outside, the treacherous inside, does it compromise immunity? Nowhere is isolated. An appetite for scares, a presumption of invasiveness, the pain of forgetting, Ailanto, please check your language, a bougainvillea won't save us. Only the male stinks in scarce any wind. Only the male sings in ragged grief of heaven and being tired. Enter Samara, the helicopter seed, fibrous, papery, wind carried above innate borders into pinnate structures beyond a simple fruit. Does it promote animal disease? Inch by inch, an orgy of touching things. A tree can't be a pet. She looked out through the leaves, a diaspora of dappled light. Envision the invasion, the tumor of the day. At maturity, it will not open. A flash of tenderness, pathways of persistence, since yes, we are confined. In the leafed darkness of summer, the master workman fell. The silence descended, rats abounded, the smell of life itself. We fell prey, our scars, our hearts, we survived, we traveled, ornaments in the making, not a hemlock, not a sumac. Well, does it noise pollute? Regardless, they meddled. They needed nature natural, preserved, colonial to the brim. Dead is how they like us. Meanwhile, the global measuring tape unfolds, keen to contain the clonal hum, the prickly spread of heaven, this rich, sourceless voice, that elusive embodiment of elsewhere. That's the end of the poem. This image is also by Matthew Schrader. And since I'm here with the book, it also has a little summary of itself or of its inception and slightly arcane bibliography at the end. And over to you, Saretta.
Oh, thank you for that, Omar. Thank you so much for, well, thank you to Brittany and Aaron and White Columns and everyone for hosting. Thank you, Omar, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with Christian and Cecilia in spirit. Thank you for sharing the pages. I think when I first, I'm glad that everyone who may be on who doesn't have the book yet was able to see them. It was like I remember the first time opening it and moving through those first couple and like that feeling of emergence of like becoming a body and thinking about the different kinds of life and kind of language we are along the way. And just being able to have that experience again, like on the screen was really nice. And so something about the language in this book that really struck me for the first time, made me think about, like, Omar, the uniqueness of your like perspective of Blackness, like, you know, being one that's not American. And I think in literature in the United States, like, we don't get enough of that. Like, we don't, and even when we get it, we're not thinking about like the uniqueness of those perspectives, and also thinking about like your relationship to migration, which is one that's like emerges within itself and beyond itself. Like, it's kind of like the line you just said a little while ago, these like, it like emerges these thresholds of alienness, right? Like that, yeah, like the displacement is constantly moving beyond where you are, even as you like arrive to its edge. I'm going to drop in the chat a podcast that Omar did that has been really amazing for me. Oops. There we go. In which he talks about migration and his family, specifically it's like through the lens of the slave trade in Northern Africa, and listening to it and listening to how he speaks about or spoke about like the way that that history like kind of punctuates the relations between family members and between generations, really inspired me to think more about the history of how the military and that kind of migration that it produced is punctuated in my own family. And so I'm going to read from some of the writing that I've been working on, like trying to move toward just a language that more like that reflects that that history. And I'm setting an alarm for 10 minutes. Okay. Then morning opens our chest to another science. Veins negotiate a well-marbled music of territory, thermal imaging, a whole being to radiate or convert to blood sugar. Even displaced, the location is feeling, is stripping off our socks, preparing our heads with sweet oil. The dominant orientation veined a story about nature, skin graft periphery folded over our shoulders, militant roots open to the half-drawn beauty of corridors. If one scar rots the length of an afternoon, I want to wake every morning into love where love is the question of how I'm going to help you get free, where that means whatever it needs before the error of understanding. The future bends down from its fine-grained neck, breathing. Slick, split, brilliant, light passes through a moment which doesn't mean the moment ends. The moment continues with clarity. I release the trigger and rounds emerge colored wounds from the berm. Even this sound our valley impresses. Even the future of thorned perennials bend. There would be no one to ask the question. I want language for what the government did to my body. The officers watched lengths of our street. Our legs were barely covered. Our streets illuminated threat red through variation, iris, flora, bare repulsion blossoming into anything you might ask for. We studied the houses from their ugly numbered orifices, the same in Panama, Kentucky, as no contractor ever had another idea. Hypothetically, I raised my hand. A bruise withdrawn from the door jammed with heat. A hypothetical scar may discharge to address error. Any amendments being 2 or more, or a small ridge letter after the last digit of the year beginning with A. Being a room burdened with skin incapable of sustaining even an everyday euphoria. Barracks and all their lights, their social prefixes forced open. The error, a story burdened into a country. The error, the hanging weight, the concert of landlessness, waiting for them we. Listen to the territory, open the bright hot door. The name lost arrives under the knees of an idea. No, we're going to do it this way. We're going to fill our lungs up with juice. We're walking to the corner store on behalf of so-and-so. We put on our persistent faces. In the face of privatization, in the width of wet rope, the mill fan, electricity prices rising. The increasing aftermath of repulsion as arrival is a third-party contract in every nigga left holding the bag. One impression restrained, another continues the terminal point of brutal collectivity, enforceable hours at which relationship must shift. Our eyes were barely covered, our legs barely cold. We woke with the straightforwardness of being Black, regardless of what happened after. what post-gestural we paid for. In some cases, the orders are identified. Distal injuries accumulate into a question of when. The orders, warm, retching fever of, it is how scale emerges. The darker the berry, the longer we had to wait. I was trying to get in touch with the orifices, the long-lit corridors, with family over in Waco, but static smeared the archival record and my cortisol levels were sky high. The systemic invasion, the plants were all coming from somewhere hideously arranged. Listen to the officers wait for the territory to arrive. Daily, we waited at the barricaded roads, the tinted glass of half-drawn windows. In the street, forms were understanding and having always to be told, if you don't stop smiling, I swear. We watched for the forms through which understanding passes, proxy to the conditions from which they emerge, drawing intelligence, and its other surfaces through vegetation. Such a simple thing. Then we is the horizon. Every story holds a collective body, amorously or otherwise. If a sentence passes always through landscape and that landscape is not vacant, then the texture at certain points impresses the body, physically, physiologically, by shafts of perfect teeth. And in the tissue between localized militarism and this one desert, how and what in arid psychology borders resist, how blunt trauma to subskeletal fucking, and from vegetation, a wound. If skin passes always porous through language, texture is compelled by desire. Try navigating a census with your mouth full of sores. And in the tissue between militarized ecology, this scar along my thigh. And from being broken, a science. Assume narration as transitive in grammatical and logical sense of surfaces charged with a history of water. This murderous clarity we cannot withstand. And I'll read some from another section. By way of intimidation, feelings of agency, states of unexploded ordnance, ate up motherfuckers, bite suits, and etc. The US military is the world's leading producer of carbon emissions that isn't a country. If you include countries, it occupies the third seat. Among things I've done of which I'm not proud, military service isn't first, but high on the list. Years of service mark my most far-reaching geographic impact. This feeling is clear, then the words leave my mouth always slowly. From those years, I carry a recon suit in cherry red, snuggled against vital organs, bloated in every most inopportune situation. The fabric, saturated, multiplies still into itself. I shake out the contents and it smells like time went off, that anxious aroma textured unaccountable. I tell myself, don't wish again, looking back into decades you trusted your body. I was looking out to the dunes, boiling cauliflower noodles when my cousin called from Afghanistan looking swole. The family math nerd, this nigga stays working out. Desert signal distorted his face and that scar ran the evening between us. Not the UN report of 88 plus civilian casualties this year. Through a string of unrelated incidents, he made it home for the birth of his third child, a girl, fresh as daisies. Conditions arranged through tents and blood, ancestry is a prayer that way, a risk assessment to dilate admissibility. My grandmother, who swears she will never send anybody's Black child to jail, is a boss at scoring jury duty. Some people make you kill them, acting crazy, she says, crossing her legs. Ancestry comes off the tongue warped or split by terrain. In her case, magnolias is another way to pray, Lord, deliver us not, begging a question. Relief from the general accounting against Black life in this country is one context to consider my cousin, another cousin, the day his state warped in the parking lot of Equinox, straddling the Floridian aquifer unaware. As an individual under irresistible conditions, you may take your life. If as an individual you take another, you're immediately something else. Both in the context may be further complicated. I stay the urge to write a natural world from the consolation of distance. My origin, in a sense, the skeletal base, sensitive to light, millennia, and porosity of corpses. Context is recited over cobbler after the fact, over top of Crisco and what there isn't room to ask, where the tree had to do with it. what animals we were before, the recipe beyond what has already been told to you. Though the discharge bears weight, by the grace of God, nothing is unexplainable. I was young and running into things. Light, a building corner in Ghent, the German pedestrian at dusk who held his neck and then his back, who I clearly, barely touched. People said, how can you rear in the base chaplain? They said I was going to hell, but he had been so polite. Asking was running, for not this one or this one, for flatter abs and a thigh gap. If I got a sticky bun from the snack bar, I said to myself, you are going to hell. As a legal professional, I strung locations to bodies to jurisdictions stripped of grass. Appeals were ceremonious. The authorities assured us you will feel everything. Blunt estrangement, yet the warmth from breakfast burritos in the conference room Thursdays. My eyes burned from the gas. The gas, chambered into organs, was an order that I won't forget. In Cyprus, they took my passport, said, say you're from Canada. Canada, I practiced, the sand laced with feral cats. I slid my hand along the belly of someone's almost bride before the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, a culture under which telling was any action a reasonable person might interpret as homosexual behavior, a culture under which asking for it could be anything, clarification on a sound, measurable trust. As in the pursuit of land, trust may be cultivated variously, our sights shifted immediately, occasionally, and down the road. I think that's a good stopping place. Thank you very much again, Omar. Christian, take it away.
Okay, I think everyone can hear me. This, give thanks to White Columns, to Brittany, Erin, everybody at White Columns for the care and support. And, I'm so honored to be a part of this beautiful grounding to celebrate Clonal Hum, and give thanks to Omar for inviting me, and to Saretta for that beautiful reading as well, both of you, and to Cecilia and Spirit. Yeah, it's funny to even think of how randomly I got to know Omar, and then of course, we know 100 people, 1,000 people in common. He knows everyone. And I, meeting you, Omar, I felt, oh, I'm connecting with a fellow Nowerian, which, this Trinidadian word for, it can mean a lot of things, but I just felt that. And so it's so especially in such a time of grief for me and so many, it's really beautiful and kind of sustaining to be just here in conversation and in community, and to think about the place that I know we both live in, which is in the specific syntax of migration. So I want to kind of share just brief work in celebration, inspired by Clonal Hum. And the first poem, I realized I had to read it, thinking about Tree of Heaven. I didn't realize until today that the coconut tree in many places was also referred to as Tree of Heaven or Tree of Life, partly because you could do so many things with it. You could do everything with it, and you could feed yourself, you could give yourself drink, you could make things out of it. So I have a poem that I wanted to read that is a kind of love poem for the palm, for the coconut palm tree, kind of a strange poem inspired by a BBC documentary I saw on flying fish in Tobago. And these flying fish were actually spawning in the branch of a coconut tree on the sea, but I did something different with it. And, you know, I was thinking, the palm tree is a Caribbean cliche. And in some ways, it was a challenge that I set for myself to kind of dream towards that which I'm told to run away from. So anyway, this poem, particularly in celebration of Clonal Hum, is called Palm. Your voice returned, a palm frond startling the wind, then carried off to sea a night the trees went walking, adrift with memory and sargassum, enduring grace of the palm despite estates and inns, fictions of voyages, the palm weep for you, lost plumes of their dreaming, offspring of the cleaving wind. Gone frond, you stray, a weeping guitar in the entangled Atlantic until the winged fish find you, swarming into script, thousands flitting foil flash, sea to sky to sea, switching time to spawn in your fan of feathers, rouse the altering smoke of life force, insistent as the hum of cicada and the earth. The fish pearl you gravid with gold, a manger, abyssal city, Dwaraka, something scribbled on each leaf in Sanskrit, here in the sown and sowing sea, which deifies change, defies it, my creed. Fugitive palm, to the common turn, the surface boils, busy with living, a tree again, gold to silver, we await the season, sea beneath, winter blooms. And I'll just read two more poems. And the next poem is an elegy for the great Jamaican British thinker, Stuart Hall, who died in 2014. I don't know what to say about this poem. I mean, it's written also in conversation with John Akomfra's 3-screen essay film on Stuart Hall called The Unfinished Conversation. And it was also written in a moment which continues when those migrants from the Caribbean, those people from the Caribbean who immigrated to the UK in the 50s on the Empire Windrush, or 48 it might have been, are now being seen as illegal immigrants by the state. So anyway, I mean, this poem is about a kind of larger conversation that, you know, Omar opened up and Saretta is picking up on about Black migration. Sculpture with fragments of Stuart Hall. I would have gone back, the voice full of shells, gravel, liquid washing stones, back meaning lost island or calendar, a thing rigged with bones, unbending, unfolding past the hard symmetry of clocks, vertebrae of thought moving now in real time, home, a word hollow as the bone of birds, toady, cling, galling, euphonia, that dream was over. Such oniric geometry, the blue room built by Miles, his horn a grail from which you sup, the saudade of marine might have been, never will be, embouchure unthought, no better than Vidya for leaving. So we leave, skein of shadows, silent psalms for how our scourge was beauty, home, bright boys fleeing the estate for another on that other island, jolted by the freight of shame. Mass Hall, thanks for the company on the volte-face voyage, stingy brim on which we sailed, migration of monarch butterflies. Landfall at Port of Avonmouth in a scene from Hardy, landfall at Tilbury Dock to step off the caravel in white gloves, stout ties, leave to remain vagrant. Lonely Oxonians together, oak hatch of the board, weed shade, then off to All Souls to cram for mods, toiling in Codrington, we leaf through Thistlewood. And so we are marked. Is it Marx or Douglas with that beard? Bound to become Judas Brutus, blood diamonds, paid us in arrears to try the line of Hopkins, Auden, Eliot, Dunn. Evensong at New Chapel to ease the medieval weight of failure in the refrain of white robes, one brown seraph alone. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea. 'Gainst the towers most colored I feel, dear Stuart, in these duds, our hide, sub fusciturnum. You grasp browning leaflets on the stump, oh, betraying beauty of brown. Bankra, Babancourt, Venetian ducats, Dalpuri, Kaki, Galgan. Remember the strange fog at night on Broad Street as if below Friedrich's Wanderer? But as you taught, who more wanderer than we, the evicted on the victor's turf, playing the past, loss of force centripetal? All praise to your mind, a sextant, darklit as Diwali. You bless our kin severance. How I wish to forget your sister strapped to the sugar mill, charged with spoiling the color scheme, sedition. Ah, Kompai, even leaves of the croton sprout from our eyes. There is no going back. Thinking translucence, you say, bend the stick, different than Lenin or United Fruit. The rank of Bombay mangoes exceeds all migrations. The lignum vitae insists on itself. Navel string toughens to twine with the rhizome, portal in the ground. I'm looking at time. I'll just one more and then with all my gratitude and celebration of your work, Omar, Clonal Hum and beyond, all the work that you do to connect. So if I think I'm gonna try to share screen and just read this poem quickly. There we go. Okay, I think you can see that even though, pardon my cluttered keyboard. And so I'll just say that, so this image is of course an image of Toussaint Louverture. And, you know, Toussaint Louverture, there were no paintings of him done while he was alive. But this image here is by, the Haitian painter Louis Rigaud. And he made this painting in 1877. And it was the first, so this is the earliest portrait of Toussaint Louverture by a Haitian painter. And Rigaud made a whole suite of portraits of Haitian leaders in the 19th century. And these are held at Yale University. So this is part of a larger series and this poem is called Louverture. Louis Rigaud, Toussaint Louverture, 1877, oil on canvas. I was born with a call, fait à coiffe, blind with sight, one eye seeking, the other ravening, Irish gyre bolting, something pulsing in my name, Rigaud. Veiled name flung from the French, offspring of Ricard, Norman drawn of Richard, meaning powerful leader, a joke from the gods. The leader returns, sky engraved, rising from a coin, the half-open gate of the mouth, and the eye to a mouth, a Louverture, the horse ran off. I sight of the man bareheaded, without arms, manners to re-enter this call, vellum of canvas, nan pays sans chapeau, nights aching into dawn. I tried to catch the hero's thousand faces, but what could I see? Certain birds rushed back to the mouth. He was astonished. What was it in the faint terror of memory, the heart changing, even the thought of goyave and then goyave, or a color quicker than thinking, a ripening throughout? It was wonder we, petit matin, how blue was difficult and possible. Here, what cannot be taken, what cannot be slain. To be astonished, revel, revenant, was a swift stillness, was a blazed blackness as he astonished the sky of my study, petit matin, second sea, overseas, silhouette of a shimmering instant, as when the body leaves an impression in water only to vanish the moment it is made. To be astonished, darkling auroral to sight. I tried for the eyes first, then the hair, graying carapacities of the mind, the flickering energies of secrets and touch, a mask, a face, pentimenti of the whole isle, not a jutting simian jaw, toothless, accidental god, Hanuman gulping the sun, the land, bloodless, bloodlust, blood fluid, blood sight, blood franc, blood orang general. I want to know what to do with my eyes, to be astonished, being, begin, new as foam, needful as green, if not a leaf, if not an ambush of space, you dream me. Each decade reeked of burning cane, indefinite from your dreamery, petit matin, mind a mapu leaf, over fields of bones and bagasse, hair, not hair, lizard on a leaf, tout moon se moon, and all lizards, all leaves. I pray in pain for the grace to be new. O Juve, O children, laughing, laughing, laving your eyes. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you, Christian. And thank you, Saretta, for your beautiful readings. I don't know if we're back in gallery view, if you can see us all or not. But in waiting for that to perhaps happen, I just wanted to reiterate my thanks to everyone for being here. And also, I just noticed that my parents were here, which for what is probably, I mean, certainly their first webinar ever. And also, they're not understanding a word of what's been going on for the last hour. So I just want to say, Mama, Baba, merci beaucoup d'être là. Laito Ramorko. Et on se parle plus tard.
But I had some Creole in my phone, so hopefully they got that.
Wow, this was quite a combination of readings. I'm not sure how to describe it. I'm very grateful. And I thank you. And I'm not sure where we should go from here exactly.
Do you want to, I mean, I feel like we should just maybe ask a few questions or talk about Clonal Hum. I mean, just this beautiful, beautiful book. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, well, you kick it off.
Well, I mean, Omar, I'm really interested in the shape of thought in these poems. I mean, they're, you know, you sort of describe them, you talk about them at the end about the sort of literal 2x4 textual boxes. And, you know, I really liked what Saretta, you were saying at the beginning about how the poem comes into being, in a sense. I mean, it's sort of how you use erasure, but almost in reverse as this kind of proliferation, you know, this growing. Yeah, so I'm really just interested in the form of the poem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important aspect of it. And it's actually what made it come into being. I mean, for the longest time, I was thinking about this tree and not knowing what to do with it. Just to put it back again into context, it all started by, you know, a kind of random message from Aaron Gamil saying, you know, do you know Matthew Schrader? Have you heard of the Atlantis tree? Can we talk? I mean, it was just kind of like that. And it all started with a studio visit at Matthew's studio here in Brooklyn. And he was showing me his work. He was talking to me about the tree that he knew well growing up in Philadelphia. I had never heard the name of this tree. And there was something really interesting. I mean, you know, your poem that you read, Christian, Sculpture with Fragments of Stuart Hall. The Matthew was working on sculptures and photographs with fragments of ailanthus trees in a way, and his sculptural work has to do with, I'm not sure how to describe it, but it kind of uses these it uses literal 2x4s as a unit of work, as a unit of thinking, as a spatial kind of unit. And for those who don't know, because a number of people attending are not from the US, and I actually, when I visited Matthew's studio, I wasn't sure what a 2x4 was either. So it was an immersion into all sorts of things. 2x4 basically means 2 inches by 4 inches. And it's a piece of lumber that is 2 inches thick and 4 inches wide, and it's used for construction. So it's just like a rectangular cylinder of wood in a way. And so it has to do with construction tools and construction standards, right? And geometrical units of architecture and all of that. And beyond or behind that, the infrastructures of our lives, like what the texture, what holds up or what constrains the textures of our lives. And to work with that in terms of sculpture, you know, after months of thinking about this, suddenly I came back to this 2x4 and the grammar of Matthew's sculpture in a way, thinking that it's not unlike, you know, poetic form, you know, these kinds of molds or constraints that are not only constraints, they're also things that help us to produce creatively, right? By pushing against them, by working around them, by playing with them. And so I thought, you know, this is an interesting way to proceed, that instead of trying to shape poems into, well, the first thing I should say is that Matthew was not particularly interested in me writing an essay about his work, which was part of the amazing generosity of this encounter. He was working on producing this set of works for this edition in a box that Michel Obultra was producing, and they always come with a text. But Matthew from the beginning said, you know, you don't need to write about my work, we can have a conversation. And so I was thinking of the form as a kind of a possible conversation with his sculpture, and this idea of, instead of thinking with the unit of a line, you know, iambics or syllables or whatever it is, to think in terms of these blocks, like actually make a 2x4 inch rectangle on the page and use a typeface where each letter takes up the same space, and kind of just have these blocks of text, this poetry as prose that has to fit in a box. And it seemed to be appropriate also to the idea of a so-called invasive tree, that is to say, that can kind of grow and occupy space in ways that, you know, are hard to account for. And what happens if you kind of circumscribe it into a box? So there's this kind of language that keeps trying to find a shape and to find space, and then it reproduces itself into another box. And I could have written many more of these, but yeah, that was part of the idea, let's say. And just to add, speaking of Stuart Hall, I think there's one phrase, I mean, there's a lot of borrowed language in Clonal Hum. And I think the one phrase about "I am here to return the gaze" is from Stuart Hall in response to a question he was asked about why he came to England. And he's like, you guys have been looking at us for centuries. I am just here to return the gaze.
I want to think a bit more about, like, something that I was thinking as both of you were reading is like how lush the work felt, like both of your readings. And Christian, you used the term nowhereans, and so I was like, oh yeah, nowhere, it's such a lush place, like it must be like. And then just now, Omar, when you said the 2x4 is what restrains the textures of our lives. And so I was just thinking about those two things together, and wondering if you might talk more about like kind of like what for you, like what allows for the capaciousness of Noeria, and also like what do you see as like some of the like ideological frameworks or even physical frameworks that provide its I mean, it seems contrary, right? Because it's nowhere, there's nothing, but like that provide the structure of its texture.
Do you want to go ahead, Christian? I want to hear more about Noarians.
Oh, I mean, this is all for you. I mean, all I'll say is that it's a Trinidadian, Trinbagonian word where obviously, people use it basically if they can't place you, right? But I sort of think about it also around what does it mean to create a space of liberty, or have to invent a space of liberty beyond the legitimacy of the state. So that's another way that I sort of think about it. And it's also about liminality, like just sort of being between places, which so many of us are. I don't know how you feel about that, but like I said, when I met you, that's what I felt. I'd say, here's a fellow Noarian,
Yeah, I felt something similar. I didn't have a word for it. I mean, Christian and I met only once in a museum cafe and other parts of the museum. It ended up being an eventful day of protest and other things. But yeah, that's interesting what you're saying about people can't place you. This reminds me of my first extended visit to the US. I mean, I've been living here for 6 years, but I had come here a number of times before that. And initially as an exchange student for one school year when I was in my early 20s. And up to that point, I mean, I had grown up in Morocco and I had lived a few years in France as a university student, but that was all known territory in one way or other, right? Home and then the former colonizer. I knew the language. I knew France in more ways than one before going there. And then here I was in the US, living here for a year, and I had never thought about questions of I mean, I hadn't thought really clearly about questions of race or anything like that. And it was really funny to me the way people placed me. So suddenly I was Brazilian. I was all sorts of things in the US, because in France, it was never a question because Moroccans are a known quantity. Like, okay, you're from North Africa, we know you, or we think we know you. And there's a place for it in the culture. But at the time, this was a year before September 11. So the whole thing about Arabs or Muslims was not really a thing the way it became after. It was 2001. And so it was really fascinating to me. All these encounters I was making here were very fascinating. For instance, one of them that I often tell is there was, I think it was Black History. I was going to Columbia University and I was living in this place called International House near Columbia University, which is full of hundreds of students from many, many countries. It was like this fascinating place. And then they would organize these cultural celebrations at various moments. And I think for Black History Month, there were some African-American students who wanted to organize an event, and they wanted contributions from people who came to New York from Africa, who had grown up in Africa. And somebody introduced me to one of these. It was a young African-American woman. And she looked at me and she was a little bit puzzled. I had short hair, so, you couldn't see my becoming angel with the afro, as Christian would say. And so it was hard to place. And she would look at me and she didn't know how to phrase her question. And I didn't know what to expect from her question. And she's like, okay, maybe you can do something with us, but I have to ask you, do you consider yourself Black? it took me by total surprise. I had no idea what to respond. Actually, I don't even remember what I responded. I think I responded a Nowerian kind of response where I did not affirm Blackness because I had never identified as Black. It wasn't part of my, upbringing or notion of self at the time. And I recognized something in her question that I did not want to kind of push away. So I probably found a way to say that I wasn't too sure, but that I definitely consider myself African and that we should talk or I don't know. But there was I think it was a Nowerian moment because I did end up participating in the celebration in some way or other.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's what I say to that is but I like the conversation. I like what you're asking, Saretta, too. And then, even talking about Paris, I kind of remember talking to you, Omar, about how you said you felt even more comfortable in French than English. And then because I was also reading the form, the 2x4, and this plot of land and the garden, but also the relationship with the prose poem, of course, which is a French form. Thinking about Rimbaud and Baudelaire. So that came up, and so I really was curious to if you could talk maybe about language and about translation, because your work, you move between so many different spaces in terms of the work that you do with Cooper Union and the gallery, and with this book now in poetry. And I'm wondering about translation, language.
For the longest time I kind of refused to consider myself a poet, but I guess now it's too late after this evening. Sarah, my partner, who is also here and who is a poet and has always kind of on the contrary, for a long time, even before publishing poetry, wanted, she knew she was a poet. And it always seemed impossible for me to know, what it is I'm doing or what it is I will be doing, including in terms of language, and including it within the realm of thinking and writing. A few years ago, I would not have imagined this book. I have been, using English, reading English, writing various things in English for a long time, but I don't know how to think about this question because it feels it evolves, it keeps changing. I fell into English at some point, and it's been a generous space to me. It allows me things that maybe French does not. I am more at ease in French in the absolute. I feel, it's strange to say, in a way, I feel I know the French language more intimately because a lot of my youthful reading was done in French. A good part of my education was done in French. I know the literary tradition pretty deeply. But French is overdetermined in so many ways for me, right? Like growing up in Morocco, French is not just a neutral space of literature. It cannot be, and even if it is a space of literature, it's a language of, well, of course, of colonization, of current social, economic, whatever domination in Morocco. I grew up, the first language I spoke was not French. It was Moroccan Arabic. The first language I studied in school was also Arabic, but at this point, I could not write creatively in Arabic. maybe in the future, I don't know how, but for now I feel it's gone, and it's gone because of French. So all of these dynamics exist. Now, English, it's hard to talk about English as a neutral language in the world of today, but at least I would say for the purposes of, it's allowed me a path beyond the kind of duality of French and Arabic that I thought hard to supersede at a certain point. So it's kind of it's a line of flight, but to me, it's not an end. It's not because I wrote this or that I've been writing essays or poems or whatever in English that I consider English my language of writing. It is currently a space that to me feels less constrained than other spaces. But I also feel that's probably temporary. And I like the idea of not sacralizing language, even in poetry.
So you said that you've been living here for 6 years, and I realize that that's about. I'm realizing that when we first met, you had just begun living here, which I hadn't realized before. But I was also thinking about, we ran into each other in Morocco.
Yes, one of the very few people I know from here that I actually go in Morocco.
Yeah, and like I remember thinking when I saw you, like, because it was very brief, and afterwards it was like, did I even see Omar? Like, it was almost like it didn't happen, but I think it was because I saw you so differently there than like the person who I remember from Brooklyn. I'm just now, putting that together. But I would like to hear more about. I want to hear more about Noeria. I want us to talk more about Noeria, and I'm thinking about Noeria and indigeneity, and I'm thinking about it because something that I am still so drawn to about your podcast, Omar, is like this the protagonist, who's really like the once enslaved woman in the story. I see her as an indigenous figure, like indigenous and then displaced, which, she doesn't stop being indigenous because then she is displaced to another place. It's just like the identities accumulate. And so I'm thinking about that as like part of like your narrative, and like, what does it mean to have and I'm using the word indigenous, and I don't want to use it too loosely, but like, what does it mean to have like indigeneity within a space of like Noeria?
That's a tough question.
Well, it's not a question to answer. It's just like
no. I'm trying to deflect it towards the Ailanthus tree in my mind to get back to the book, because as I was rereading the book this afternoon to prepare for now and reading it now, I was just thinking that the indigeneity was something I was thinking of in writing it and in researching it, because there's this whole notion of invasive species, something that came from elsewhere that came to invade, and that's used, that in the context, for instance, of this tree, or in various botanical contexts, the appeal to how would I say this, like to the category of native or indigenous as a positive category, it's only appealed to in that way when it serves a project of mastery over nature, right? Or a project of mastery over space. We don't want this plant here because we want this to look this way, etc. Which is, like a quintessentially a white project. It's really interesting how this language of the invasive and the native in these contexts, in the context of, for instance, this tree, that you could say, like, if I'm interpreting your question, brought is a displaced tree that is indigenous from elsewhere, right? That brought us like that with it. And I don't know why I want to say with her, maybe because I'm thinking of my great-great-grandmother, but but and it is what makes the tree kind of, you know, sturdy. It says, I will grow out of cement if I have to, right? That's what the poem says. It's and it's what it is faulted for, right? Like we're trying to stop it, but it won't stop. And so it's kind of, and that infuriates botanists and whatever, and people, and some people in their backyards, because there is something in the tree that they don't recognize, that is alien to them, that resists them, that is not stopped by the usual tools of elimination, of massacre. I don't know what to call it. So it's like it's a war waged on the tree because the tree is not complying with what you're supposed to be in a certain place. It has brought what you call maybe a certain kind of indigeneity with it. And it's really interesting because at the beginning, it's really kind of a classic case. It was this exotic ornamental thing. It's pretty, we like it. We're taking advantage of it. It's helping us with shade, with whatever. It's repelling certain kinds of insects, things like that. And it's planted on nice avenues and everything. And at a certain point, it turns, like when there's a realization of something, and then it turns around completely, and then it becomes the ghetto palm. It becomes a place a tree that literally degentrifies. Like neighborhoods lose value at a certain point, started losing value when they had this tree in them. So it's really interesting how the what I call here presumption of invasiveness is rooted in an ideology of utilitarian exploitation of space that doesn't name itself in a way. And I think it's linked to all sorts of human occurrences of the same. You talked in your piece about, militarized ecology. I mean, I think it has all to do with that, what the government did to my body, I think is also a line in your piece, and what the government does to our spaces too.
Yeah. I was, thinking a lot about these questions of invasion that are so racialized, obviously, but also about sound in this book, and how, the work or the attempt of sound to interrupt time, something like the music of a phrase like Clonal Hum, how, to sort of shake or disrupt what feels like the shackles of history, the script of history in a kind of way. And so I'm really, really interested in the music of the book, right? That the sense of the relentlessness of language. And when you're talking about almost like the will of the tree of heaven, what I was thinking about is this relentless language in the book, the velocity, the choices you make around not putting in any punctuation, which are interesting around obviously the speed of the text, but also about, its visuality as a plot of land. And so I'm just, sort of interested in how you're thinking about sound here and in your work in general.
I think that may be also a question of the English language for me as well. I don't know if this is true, what I'm going to say, but the fact that English is not my first or even my second language is and even though I can't claim for it to be some kind of outside or, like language. I really know it well by now, but there is a residual foreignness of English to me. There is a possibility for me of treating it as sound, maybe easier than I would with Arabic or French somehow. Or there is maybe a temptation, like the sounds of the English language maybe strike me more immediately or first. Also, English has this, like contrary to French, for instance, it has all of these stressed syllables and all of that. So there is a melody to it, at least to my ear. And also words tend to be shorter. So there's the possibility of percussiveness more than in the French, for instance. And that was completely part of the project. As soon as I decided that the text should be these rectangles, these blocks of prose, I knew they should be without punctuation, without capitals, that it should be a thicket of language that each person had to find their way through. So there are many places that you can read in different ways. I read it a certain way, but there are places where I stopped, makes sense to me, but you could stop at other places. You could read sentences otherwise. I have to say that when I decided this, I was also thinking of a book that I really love and that I actually had started translated into French and never finished. And that uses this, it's not blocks like this, rectangles, but it is kinds of prose poems without punctuation and all of that. It's a book by Trong Tran, who's a Vietnamese American poet who lives in San Francisco, and it's called
Dust and Consciousness.
And yeah, exactly. Is it conscience or consciousness? I think it's conscience, right? Dust Consciousness. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read it in a long time, but as I was working on this, it came back to me. And that book I had encountered completely by chance. I had never heard the name Trong Tran. We were visiting the Bay Area. This was years ago. And we went to this secondhand bookstore. I don't know if it's still there, Moe's Books or one of them. And I just came across it. And I remember leaving the bookstore with 3 books by Trong Tran without having planned it at all. Something in his work attracted me. And that book in particular, I read on the airplane back to Paris at the time. And I think I started translating it almost immediately. It was also a very beautiful moment where I looked for Trong's contact info. And I wrote him an email, basically asking permission for translating this work. And his answer completely disarmed me and made me stop translating for a while, because he essentially explained that, his parents, his mother, emigrated from Vietnam to the US, but never really learned English. But she still knew French from, the colonial French of Vietnam. And he said, well, for the first time, my mother will be able to read me if you translate me into French. And it felt like such a huge amount of responsibility to put on my translator's shoulders. Like it made the travels of people and language, of people in language, of language through people. It made it so palpable all of a sudden, just in that sentence of saying, this work in French will make me speak with my mother a different way. So yeah, so that was on my mind when I was working on this, that particular story of migration and the way that Trong translated it into form and into language. And Saretta says in the chat that it was Dust and Conscience. So
I think White Columns is flicking the lights off and turning on the slow music for us right now.
It's so great talking to you both, but I guess we'll have to just make some kind of appointment and talk without the crowds and without the flickering lights. And I just want to thank you both so much for agreeing to do this, and thank everyone for coming and sticking with us. If you can see the show either in person at White Columns or just visit White Columns website to see some of Matthew's work, please do.
Yeah. Give thanks to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar, Saretta, and thank you, Christian, for joining us tonight. This has been a wonderful talk. Yes, I was flickering the lights a little towards the end.
Yeah.
So yes, Obultra 3 will be on view at White Columns through May 15th, 2021. And if you missed tonight's discussion, it will be archived and available on Matthew Schrader's exhibition page on our website, which is whitecolumns.org, in the next coming days. So have a good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for tuning in. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Brittany. Bye all.